So let's wind the clock back 20 years and throw you into the clusterfuck that is the Australian transport industry. So you're a trucker, you just got your multi-combination license and you've just taken your first job at Truckwits International and your route is Brisbane to Sydney. You replaced someone that wasn't meeting expectations, but there's a rumour that he was actually let go because he was kicking up a stink about his KPIs. But you're not going to make that mistake. You're just going to keep your head down and do what needs to be done to keep your job and keep on trucking. You know that there's someone out there ready to take your place if you screw up, so you're just not going to let that happen. You get in your big rig and you hit the road, and within a few weeks you're a full-blown truckwit slinging Roger Dodgers and 10-4 rubber duckies on UHF Channel 40 with the best of them. Your body composition is at least 20% 4 and 20 meat pies, and your closest companion is a growing stack of Zoo magazines riding shotgun. You are living the early 2000s dream. But here's the dilemma. If you did have GPS back then, it would tell you that the estimated time before the Ballina bypass was built was about 11 hours from Brisbane to Sydney, but the last guy did 11-hour trips on average, failed his KPIs, now he's on Centrelink and you're in his truck. You need to do this route in 10.5 hours to keep your job, and 10 hours if you want your bonus. And that's what makes this a true Kobayashi Maru. The sinister thing about aggregate KPIs being used as a performance management tool is that they measure you on the average time of several journeys, not one trip, not one stretch of road. There's no way to actually tell if the KPI is reasonable, safe, or even legally achievable. Again, I'm talking about days where you're navigating by street directories and not Google Maps. You're not getting live traffic updates. On average, 11 hours is okay. 10 hours, probably not. But we can't measure it exactly. The main point is that nobody's explicitly telling you that you need to speed. Nobody's telling you that you need to skip your brakes. Nobody's telling you to dodge weigh bridges. Nobody's telling you to go 120 k's an hour on the downhills. But your moment-to-moment decisions all add up to a total that goes into a system that measures you against an expectation. You can't use traffic as an excuse because you're measured 20 times over a month. You just know that right now you're in a seat and there's a number that will flag a spreadsheet that fired your predecessor. And even then, it's not like there's going to be an email chain that says you failed to do illegal things and that's why you're being fired. No, they're not going to do that because you'll have an unfair dismissal claim. You'll get a first and final warning and then you'll be out for some non-specific reason. But there are a lot of people at Truckwits International. Many have been there for 20 years. Some of them get their bonuses. Some of them get promoted. They all have their licenses, so it can't all be that bad, right? You've got some safety in numbers. So you try your best not to break the law. You might dodgy a few of your rest breaks when traffic is bad and coast downhill with the clutch in and pretend that you didn't see the needle hit 140 just so you can make your 10.5 hours. And even though what you're doing is purely to meet company expectations and you probably would never do any of this in your personal vehicle, if anything goes wrong, you take full legal responsibility. The company's not going to stop you. They're not going to call out the corners that you cut. The only thing that's tracked on their side is whether you're above or below that KPI. They will intentionally turn a blind eye to whatever methods you need to do to get there. But you know that every step of the way, the government and the transport department that issued your license has the final say after something goes wrong as to whether you breach professional standards or not. No matter how much that KPI shifts, you're still held to account to the same laws and the same standards as everyone else on the road, and chasing KPIs is not a valid excuse for breaking those standards. Let me say that again for the young people who are just not picking up what I'm putting down. If something goes wrong anywhere ever, you will be held to the standard of your qualification, and chasing KPIs is not a valid excuse for breaching those standards. It was lose-lose for truck drivers then, it's lose-lose for optometrists now. And trucking is a competitive market. The skill barrier is low, the startup cost is relatively low, there's always someone willing to do it cheaper, faster, cut more corners. And Truckwits International didn't hit their targets last year, so we all need you to kind of lift your game. You're going to get an email that you won't like by some middle manager who sees you as a cell in a spreadsheet that goes red and has never actually driven a truck before. You want to keep your job right. The only thing that we have here in excess at Truckwits International are people willing to step in and take that seat in that truck. So now the KPI schedule gets updated. We have to keep up with the market, right? We need to see who has what it takes and who's a team player and who needs to just kind of go somewhere else. It's good business and we need to survive. And now you've kind of stumbled onto the truth. The KPIs exist in two states. You either failed them and you're being monitored, or you beat them and now your achievement is next year's minimum expectation. Never in the history of corporate enterprise has someone said, oh, that's enough profit. So now you're out the door if you go to Brisbane to City in 10.5 hours, you get to keep your job if you do 10 hours, and you get a bonus if you do it in 9.5 hours, which is now impossible. Because we can't just keep giving everyone bonuses every year, guys, come on. And those numbers weren't tested. They didn't come from a ride-along where someone from upper management timed it or did some sort of trial. No, it was a spreadsheet. Green number good, red number bad. There's no other reason or logic, no thoughts about your safety. Someone wanted more money, and this was the lever that they could pull to make that happen. This type of KPI is the mechanism of this fucking Darwinist natural selection experiment that companies use to clean their corporate gene pools of workers with a spine. Your bonus is impossible. 9.5 hours is hitting every green light for a month straight with no breaks, and unless you're shipping styrofoam, your truck will never accelerate or brake quick enough for that, and you can't even keep your job comfortably anymore without breaking the law several times on each trip because 10 hours is already shaving 60 minutes off a comfortable, safe, legal ride. But who are you going to complain to? HR? You might as well slap a Fire Me sticker on your forehead and Superman yourself off the 9th floor balcony. But even if there was someone to complain to, some sort of trucker peak body organization, what would they do? What would they have to say in your defense of industry-wide KPIs that everyone just puts up with because they don't technically break the law, but are designed to pretty much get people killed or fired? I know what they'd say. Almost exactly. They'd say things like, well, unfortunately, everyone has KPIs. Or like, it's a really competitive market out there. Or they'd do a KPI position statement that's just ridiculously condescending, like, Jim works for a trucking company. Jim's boss tells him to go through red lights. Jim says no. Jim's boss says, okay, that's fair. And then they live happily ever after. And that's the entirety of your instructions on how to defend yourself against this. Nobody's going to give you actual representation. Nobody's going to sit in your passenger seat and go, oh wow, 9.5 hours is actually insane. The whole industry's like this now? We should really do a position statement against that being unsustainable across the entire industry and shut the fuck up telling workers how they can apply themselves better to meet company standards. But that representative organization doesn't exist, so you don't have that representation. You don't have that advocacy. Nothing's going to change the entire industry's culture on your behalf. You can't even get anyone to say anything bad about one workplace because Truckwits International never told you to break the law. And who's going to go out of their way to prove that driving from Brisbane to Sydney in 10 hours is almost impossible without being forced to make minute-to-minute unsafe choices along the way? That's a whole lot of work just to, prove that your company should be uncompetitive? So you shut your mouth. And the KPIs go up again. Eventually, you hit a threshold. You start losing co-workers. The good ones find the tiny retreating pockets of the industry that exist outside the mainstream competition. The other 20-year veterans that always stood up for themselves are suddenly no longer there. One by one, through some chronic force of attrition, they've been replaced by sketchy dudes that always seem to have a heads up on which day they're going to be doing random amphetamine testing. When you started, you were this middle-of-the-road employee willing to bend a few rules here and there to keep the boss happy, but also willing to put your foot down when someone suggested something completely inappropriate. Now, you're alone. The window of normality has shifted so far that these new kids see you as the guy who won't pull his weight or make any reasonable accommodations. Normal to them is a 19-hour unbroken shift pissing in Gatorade bottles and filling out entirely fraudulent logbooks. And those guys get promoted past you and start training and writing processes for the next batch of people that come along and say, isn't this how we've always done it? And you feel like the only sane person in the asylum. But you can't say anything now because it's happening everywhere, not just your company. In fact, every company that doesn't do this is being eaten up by the ones that do. Now you're in an accelerating race to the bottom at 9 hours, an impossible time for a safe trip. Bonuses are just maybe a monthly pizza party, and the wages are half that from when you signed on, but the pressure keeps rising. It's not like the middle managers' salaries are going up either. They have their own KPIs. They can't help. But there's still a lineup of blokes at the front gate waiting for your job, and the business is aggressively looking for excuses to replace you because you're on a legacy contract, you're an expense they can't afford, even though you're barely making rent. The company culture is so fucked that when you finally have enough and get the balls to raise the alarm, all you get in response from your co-workers, who you thought would probably stand by your side, is, sorry, I got bills to pay, it's a tough market, I can't afford to take any action. Then you realize you are a stranger in your own workplace. And you're the only one in there that actually thinks this isn't normal. Everyone's been replaced by someone with either professional myopia or industrial Alzheimer's. Apathy has spread. It's too late because any form of resistance means instant replacement without representation. And now the industry is in an end-stage positive feedback loop. And do you know what happens then? Everybody dies. Everybody fucking dies. head-on collisions increase, single vehicle accidents skyrocket, truckies slam into stationary objects with blood full of speed and logbooks full of lies. And nobody gives a shit at first. Nobody bats an eye up until the point that a current affair starts trying to interview managers after fatalities, or the transport department proposes an inquiry into the cause of the spike of accidents, or the insurance companies change their premiums. But as soon as one of these groups has a little nibble, there's blood in the water, and it becomes a regulatory frenzy. Almost overnight, everything flips on its head. Transport companies pushing drivers to their limit becomes as uncool as getting dick pics from Kevin Spacey. It's no longer profitable to push these KPIs with the newly adjusted insurance premiums, and legislators are hungry to audit anyone who finds their way onto the naughty list. Almost like someone flipped a switch, every truck has speed limiters, electronic logbooks, GPS tracking systems, AI-driven fatigue monitors, lane guidance systems, and all that becomes the norm at Truckwits International, because at Truckwits International, we've always cared about driver safety. And how are you going? Well, if you're not dead, you've long since been fired at this point. You ran under the assumption that logbook audits were like a lottery, and if your number got picked out, well then bad luck, you were just unlucky. You found out the hard way that your number was in a box in a warehouse that was always going to be dumped out the moment it became politically justifiable to find the funding to do so. But you were always one of Truckwits International's bad eggs, weren't you? You were always chasing those bonuses instead of driving safely. And that's what'll happen. The moment your records become a matter of exposed liability to the company's image, you get thrown under the bus with extreme prejudice. Shit, they're trying to pin other people's accidents on you. At best, there's one or two other middle managers that you can point the finger at and show some evidence and bring them down with you, but they're just going to be sacrificial lambs. You won't get your license back. But hey, at least all the truckies are safe now. Actually, no, I mean, now if we look back at the evidence of all these accidents, it seems like the failing point here is the human factor. This is why Truckwits International fully supports the upcoming legislation surrounding automating the transport industry. And I think Optometry is probably going to shake out in a similar way.